entering New Jersey. Here I am getting my ticket that I would pay at the end of the New Jersey Turnpike. Right now, I am in New Jersey on the highway, and I'm headed straight up to New York. When I was in elementary school in St. Vincent, we had to do reading, and our reading lessons were important. Reading was something that we did aloud, so we read aloud. I enjoyed reading lessons. I remember quite vividly one of our lessons went like this. The Arawaks were peaceful people and the Caribs were warlike. That is how our history lesson had begun for our young little minds. Such early history and such statement was a sweeping statement from some European author whose purpose it was to educate the Caribbean man or the Caribbean child from a textbook that was handed down to us, which probably was printed from some press or some printing press in London. This sweeping statement was entirely inaccurate, as it was misleading. So who started to wage war on all the indigenous peoples in the Caribbean? It was not the Garifuna people. It was not the Black Carib people. But it was the Europeans who did that. They were the warlike people. They were the people who came. This is why it is important that we teach the children in St. Vincent and the Grenadines the truth about our ancestors, the Caribs, the Arawaks, and of course, the Black Caribs, the Garifuna people. Now, the Garifuna people never went chasing around the Caribbean, fighting the peoples of the Caribbean. So you can't call them warlike. You could not call them warlike. So that is where the story needs to be retold. So there is a thing called re-education. Europeans call the Caribs, the Garifunas, and any indigenous people that they came in contact with hostile. They call them barbarians. That is because they were not supposed to resist their incursion into their lands or into their homelands. Well, based on some Caribbean history, the Arawaks, however, at some point, at some time, in some circumstances, resisted the European incursion less than did the Caribs. And they paid a heavy price for that. And this might explain why, in many instances, the Arawaks faced exterminations in their populations when Europeans' incursions happened in their land. Therefore, it's a moral imperative that the scholars of history, of West Indian history, of Caribbean history, of the history of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, revisit the facts, revisit the history of what really happened in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, especially about the history of the Garifuna people. Always remember that history is about conquest and the story of the conqueror. So much of what we learn as children and youth growing up about West Indian history and that of St. Vincent and the Grenadines was written from the conqueror's point of view, from the conqueror's perspective, and was written to show conquest or to detail conquest. So we have to bear this in mind. So there is no accident that history, the meaning of history is his story, referring to the conqueror's story, not that of the conquered. So what we really have learned, much of our history growing up, was not our story or the story of our ancestors, because they did not write that story. It was a story of the Europeans or the Europeans. That was his story. So how do we fix this? Well, there are ways to fix this. We can go back and look at the manuscript. We can go back and search the manuscripts and make our deductions. Deduce what is accurate and what matches the record and what makes sense and what does not make sense or what does not add up. And yes, we can also check the fossils in the Caribbean and in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We can look at the fossils in the ground that will reveal the kinds of information critical for better analysis about what must have happened over time. To my delight, the history of St. Vincent and the Grenadines is being rewritten as we speak. I can point to the prominent historian, scholar, and intellectual in the person of Dr. Adrian Frazier. He has been given some very, very critical review of the history, especially on the matter of the Garifuna and areas about, in what sounded like his treatise on the issue of the death of the Paramount Chief Joseph Chatoyer. The British account was he was killed in a duel. Yes, according to British history, British Major Alexander Lee killed Joseph Chatoyer, who was the Garifuna leader, in a duel on Dorchester Hill. That is the version given by the British. Yes, more light is being shed as we speak about the incident that caused the death of the Garifuna chief, Joseph Chatoyer, who led the revolt against the British in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Some are now saying that he was killed only because the sword that struck him was poisoned. Now in 1772, when Chief Joseph Chatoyer led his people in a severe battle with the British forces in the region, the battle frightened the British and led to the signing of a peace treaty in 1773 that would make sure that the British leave the Garifuna people alone and the two parties could live in harmony. And that was not the end of British attempt. It must be clear that this was the first time that the British had entered into a treaty agreement with any indigenous people in the New World. As it happened, the British did not honor the treaty, and this led to further battles with the Garifuna people, led by the Carib chief, that is the black Carib chief, Joseph Chatoyer, who was made national hero on March 14, 2002 in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Paramount Chief Joseph Chatelier is St. Vincent and the Grenadines' first national hero. With regard to the incident that surrounded the Black Carib Chief Joseph Chatelier, it sounded like Dr. Fraser has some serious questions about it. Fraser's argument is the British announced Chatelier's death as a tactical measure. This is because Fraser believes that Chatelier actually did not die when the British announced his death. They were using Chatelier's death as a way to bring the resistance to an end. Chatelier was referred to by the British in another name, and there are records that show that they were actually negotiating with Chatelier even while his death was announced. It's an old trick in the book that the British have used. One must bear in mind that there are areas on the island of St. Vincent that the British did not dare venture into. For instance, the village of Greggs was a Garifuna stronghold, and another was Chateaubelair. Chateaubelair was a place where Garifuna activities were alive and well. Chateaubelair was like a haven, a place of refuge for Garifuna. Greggs could have been considered the Garifuna fortress, and Chateaubelair could have been considered the haven for Garifuna people, Garifuna activities. And by the way, I have roots in Greggs. That's where my father is from. And Chateaubelair is where I was born. So, make no mistake about it, I must have some Garifuna blood in me. So the reality is, St. Vincent and the Grenadines is and will always remain the ancestral home of all Garifuna people around the world or in the diaspora. St. Vincent and the Grenadines is going to always look forward to having that pilgrimage by the Garifuna people. So let's get used to it and get over it. That pilgrimage that the Garifuna people make to St. Vincent and the Grenadines is meaningful for them, and is very meaningful for St. Vincent and the Grenadines and the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. This is why it's important that some places in St. Vincent and the Grenadines must be considered sacred with respect to the Garifuna cause, the Garifuna roots, blood, sweat, and tears. Places like Ballysoe and places like Richmond, where that area where a quarry has been put to destroy the lands, that is Garifuna ancestral land. So we must give respect for our ancestors, the people who held our country, held our soil, and fought for it. our history is something that we must take seriously. So when I look back at my earliest of education about my country and my people, I would argue that this was the beginning of miseducation. As it went, let me repeat, the Arawaks were peaceful people and the Caribs were warlike. And when I look back at that, nonsense. That was miseducation 101. So let's stop with the miseducation and let's begin the re-education, the journey of re-education that will change our lives forever, for the better.
So I'm right here at the service station. I'm gonna stop at the service station because I need to do a few things, like stop for a minute. And so I'm gonna stop at the service station here. I'm stopping at the service station here. So I'm stopping right here at the service station for a few minutes, and so I can go in there and get something, do something for a few minutes, and then I'll be headed back off the road. New York City, I come.